The temperature had plummeted to 15 degrees below zero that Friday night in December. In most places, that would be considered brutal. In Maine, it was just winter announcing its arrival with teeth bared and claws extended. The kind of cold that could kill you if you weren't careful. The kind of cold that would become central to one of Maine's most haunting mysteries. In a modest house on Violette Avenue in Waterville, 20-month-old Ayla Reynolds was put to bed by her father, Justin DiPietro. She was wearing purple pajamas with polka dots, the kind of detail that would later be seared into the memory of everyone who heard her story. Her blonde hair was pulled back, her bright eyes heavy with sleep. By morning, she would be gone. What happened in those dark hours between bedtime and dawn? And why, 13 years later, do we still have no answers? Ayla Bell Reynolds came into this world on April 4, 2010, a beacon of light in what would prove to be a complicated family dynamic. Her mother, Trista Reynolds, was just 18 when Ayla was born, young, struggling but devoted to her daughter. Her father, Justin DiPietro, was 24, with his own set of challenges and a history that would later come under intense scrutiny. To those who knew her, Ayla was pure joy personified. She had her mother's determined spirit and a smile that could melt the coldest Maine winter. She was fearless, Trista would later tell reporters, her voice breaking. She would climb anything, explore everything. She was this tiny person with this huge personality, but beneath the surface of this seemingly ordinary family lay fractures that would eventually split wide open. Trista and Justin's relationship had been tumultuous from the start. They were young, unprepared for parenthood, and struggling with personal demons that would cast long shadows over their daughter's short life. In the months leading up to that December night, custody had become a contentious issue. Trista was dealing with substance abuse problems, a fact she would courageously admit publicly later, desperate to find her daughter. Justin had taken temporary custody of Ayla, moving her into his family home on Violette Avenue, where she lived with Justin, his mother Phoebe, and his sister Elisha. But was this arrangement truly in Ayla's best interest? Or was something more sinister at play? Saturday morning, December 17, 2011. The sun rose over a world transformed by overnight snow, casting long shadows across Waterville's quiet streets. Inside the DiPietro home, Justin DiPietro would later claim he woke up around 8 a.m. and went to check on his daughter. The crib was empty. According to Justin's initial statement to police, he searched the house frantically. He checked every room, every closet, every possible hiding place a toddler might squeeze into during an innocent game of hide and seek. But 20-month-old children don't play elaborate games of hide and seek. They don't vanish into thin air. 8:51 a.m., the call came into Waterville Police Dispatch. The voice on the other end was Justin DiPietro, and his words would launch one of Maine's most extensive missing person investigations. My daughter's missing. I can't find her anywhere. But even in those first crucial moments, something felt off to the responding officers. Why had it taken nearly an hour from discovery to call for help? What happened in that missing time? The initial response was swift but hampered by the brutal weather conditions. Officers arrived to find a house with no signs of forced entry, no obvious evidence of a struggle, and a father whose demeanor struck many as oddly detached for someone whose toddler had just vanished. The search began immediately, but nature was not on their side. The temperature had dropped even further overnight, and fresh snow was still falling. If Ayla had somehow gotten outside, through an unlocked door, an open window, any possible exit, her chances of survival in these conditions were virtually zero. Detective Jeff Love of the Waterville Police Department had seen his share of missing person cases, but something about this one made his instincts prickle from day one. The scene was too clean, the story too neat, and the family's behavior raised red flags that couldn't be ignored. In cases involving missing toddlers, we typically see one of three scenarios, explains Dr. Sarah Chen, a forensic psychologist who has consulted on hundreds of missing person cases. Accidental wandering, stranger abduction, or family involvement. The circumstances surrounding Ayla's disappearance didn't fit the first two patterns. The house on Violette Avenue became the epicenter of an investigation that would eventually involve the FBI, Maine State Police, and dozens of local law enforcement officers. Every inch was processed, every surface tested, every item catalogued and analyzed. And that's when they found it. Blood. Not a lot, just trace amounts, but enough to change everything. The blood was found in the basement of the DiPietro home, and DNA testing would later confirm it belonged to Ayla Reynolds. The amount suggested injury, but not necessarily fatal trauma. The location, however, was troubling. Why would a 20-month-old's blood be in the basement? And why hadn't anyone mentioned an injury? When confronted with this evidence, Justin DiPietro's story began to shift. He claimed Ayla had fallen and hurt her arm earlier in the week, an injury that required a trip to the emergency room. But medical records showed the injury was more severe than initially described. A broken arm that medical staff noted was consistent with either an accidental fall or non-accidental trauma. The investigation expanded beyond the physical evidence. Phone records were subpoenaed, financial records scrutinized, and the backgrounds of everyone in the house that night were thoroughly investigated. What emerged was a picture of a family under stress, with secrets that ran deeper than anyone had initially realized. In the world of criminal investigation, family members are always the first suspects when a child goes missing. Statistics are grim but clear. Children are far more likely to be harmed by someone they know than by a stranger. In Ayla's case, 3 adults were in the house the night she disappeared: Justin DiPietro, his mother Phoebe DiPietro, and his sister Alicia DiPietro. Justin DiPietro became the primary focus of investigation. His story contained inconsistencies that troubled investigators. His demeanor during interviews was described by detectives as unusually calm for a parent whose child had vanished. Perhaps most damning was his immediate hiring of a criminal defense attorney, before police had even suggested he might be a suspect. Innocent parents don't typically lawyer up in the first 48 hours, notes retired FBI profiler Marcus Webb. They're usually so focused on finding their child that legal protection doesn't even occur to them. DiPietro's behavior suggested someone who knew more than he was telling. Phoebe DiPietro, Justin's mother, presented her own set of contradictions. Initially cooperative with police, she later retained legal counsel and stopped speaking to investigators entirely. Her bedroom was directly adjacent to Ayla's room, close enough that she should have heard any disturbance, yet she claimed to have slept through the night undisturbed. Alicia DiPietro, Justin's sister, was perhaps the most enigmatic figure in the house that night. Young and reportedly close to Ayla, she nonetheless provided statements to police that seemed rehearsed and carefully constructed. Like the others, she eventually stopped cooperating with the investigation. The theories that emerged were as varied as they were disturbing. Some investigators believed Ayla died accidentally, perhaps from complications related to her broken arm or from another injury, and the family panicked, deciding to cover up the death rather than face potential criminal charges. More sinister theories suggested Ayla was deliberately harmed by someone in the house. The blood evidence, her prior injury, and the family's behavior all supported this possibility. Given Maine's proximity to major trafficking routes and ports, some theorized that Ayla was sold or given to traffickers. This theory gained traction among some in the community, but was considered less likely by law enforcement due to the lack of prior contact between the family and any trafficking networks. But which theory held water? And why were the three people who claimed to love Ayla most refusing to help find her? For months, investigators waited for the break that would crack the case wide open. They conducted over 300 interviews, executed multiple search warrants, and followed up on hundreds of tips from the public. The Maine State Police even offered a $30,000 reward for information leading to Ayla's whereabouts. The searches were extensive and heartbreaking. Dive teams scoured frozen ponds and rivers. Cadaver dogs were brought in to search wooded areas, abandoned buildings, and landfills. Volunteers combed through miles of dense Maine forest, hoping against hope to find some trace of the missing toddler. One of the most significant moments came in early 2012, when investigators announced they believed Ayla was dead and that her death was the result of foul play. This was not a decision made lightly. It represented hundreds of hours of investigation, analysis of evidence, and consultation with experts in child abduction cases. When we make a determination like that, it's based on everything we know about the case, explained Maine Department of Public Safety spokesman Steve McCausland. We don't make those statements to generate headlines. We make them because the evidence supports that conclusion. But even with this official acknowledgement, the case remained frustratingly open. The three people who had been in the house that night maintained their silence, protected by attorneys and the Fifth Amendment. How do you solve a murder when the only witnesses refuse to speak? How do you find justice for a child when the very people who should want answers most are the ones blocking the investigation? While investigators hit wall after wall, Ayla Reynolds refused to give up. The young mother who had once struggled with her own demons transformed into a fierce advocate for her missing daughter. She spoke at press conferences, organized search parties, and kept Ayla's story in the public eye when others might have given up. "I know people judge me for my past," Ayla said during one particularly emotional press conference. "I know I wasn't perfect, but I was getting help, I was getting better, and I was fighting for my daughter. These people took that chance away from both of us." Ayla's transformation was remarkable to witness. The young woman, who had once battled addiction, became an articulate spokesperson for missing children, appearing on national television programs and working with other families facing similar tragedies. She also became increasingly vocal about her suspicions regarding Justin and his family. "They know what happened to my daughter," she would say repeatedly. "They know, and they're choosing to let me suffer. They're choosing to let Ayla's memory suffer." The custody battle that had preceded Ayla's disappearance took on new significance in light of these statements. Court records revealed that Justin had sought full custody of Ayla, citing Ayla's substance abuse issues. Some wondered if the disappearance was somehow connected to this legal battle, a permanent solution to a temporary custody arrangement. As the investigation continued, more troubling details emerged. The blood found in the basement wasn't the only physical evidence that raised questions. Investigators also discovered that several items had been removed from the house before police arrived, items that might have contained crucial evidence. Luminol. Testing revealed additional blood traces throughout the house, though not in quantities that suggested a massive trauma. This evidence painted a picture of someone attempting to clean up after the fact, but not someone who had the time or expertise to do a thorough job. Perhaps most damning was the revelation that Justin DiPietro had taken out a life insurance policy on Ayla just months before her disappearance. While not illegal, the timing raised obvious questions about motive. Cell phone records also revealed interesting patterns. On the night of Ayla's disappearance, there was an unusual amount of activity between the phones of the three adults in the house. Multiple calls and text messages were exchanged between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m., hardly typical behavior for people who claimed to be sleeping peacefully. What were they discussing during those late-night communications? Were they coordinating their stories, planning their next moves? The forensic evidence, while not conclusive enough to bring charges, painted a clear picture for investigators. Ayla Reynolds had died in that house, and the 3 adults present knew exactly what had happened. In 2014, 3 years after Ayla's disappearance, a grand jury was convened to review the evidence and determine if criminal charges should be filed. For months, witnesses were called, evidence was presented, and investigators hoped that finally justice might be served. The grand jury's decision was perhaps the most frustrating development in the entire case. They declined to return any indictments, not because they believed the family was innocent, but because the evidence, while strongly suggestive, wasn't quite strong enough to guarantee a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. "It's the prosecutor's nightmare scenario," explains former Maine prosecutor Jennifer Walsh. "You have a case where everyone involved knows what happened, but you can't prove it to the standard required for a criminal conviction." The grand jury basically said, "We know something terrible happened, but we can't prove exactly what or exactly who did it." The decision devastated Ayla Reynolds and frustrated investigators who had worked tirelessly on the case. But it didn't end their efforts. The case remained open, and investigators continued to hope that someone would eventually break their silence. Today, more than 13 years after Ayla Reynolds vanished from her crib on that bitter December night, her case remains one of Maine's most notorious unsolved mysteries. The little girl who would now be a teenager has never been found, and the 3 people who were in the house that night have never provided satisfactory explanations for what happened. The questions that have haunted this case from the beginning remain unanswered. Why did it take Justin DiPietro nearly an hour to call police after discovering Ayla was missing? How did Ayla's blood end up in the basement? What were the 3 adults discussing in their late-night phone calls? Where is Ayla Reynolds? The case has had a profound impact on Maine's approach to missing children cases. New protocols were implemented for rapid response, and the state invested heavily in training for law enforcement officers dealing with child disappearances. For Ayla Reynolds, now in her 30s, the fight continues. She has become an advocate for other families of missing children and continues to speak publicly about Ayla's case, hoping that someone, somewhere, will finally break their silence. "I will never stop looking for her," Ayla says. "I will never stop fighting for answers. Somewhere out there, someone knows what happened to my baby girl. And someday, somehow, the truth is going to come out." As this story ends, the search for Ayla Reynolds continues. Her case remains open with the Maine State Police, and investigators still follow up on tips and leads as they come in. The reward for information leading to her whereabouts remains active, but perhaps more importantly, Ayla's story serves as a reminder of how quickly a life can be changed forever, and how the silence of a few can inflict devastating pain on many. In a world where children disappear with terrifying regularity, her case stands as both a tragedy and a call to action. The truth about what happened to Ayla Reynolds on December 16, 2011, may still be locked away in the memories of those who were there that night. But as long as people remember her name, as long as her mother continues to fight, and as long as investigators refuse to give up, there remains hope that someday justice will be served. And until that day comes, the question remains, what happened to Ayla Reynolds?